Welcome back, everybody. Look what we have on the bench today. I thought we'd do something a little bit different. I guess I've been in kind of one of those different moods here lately, but what we have here is the Freshman Masterpiece, somewhere around 1924, 25. It's 100 years or so. That's according to the Radio Museum and some other sources. Depending upon where you see it, this could be anywhere from 24 to 26. And I need some help on this. Everybody do your R&D and tell me what the model of this is, because the best I can tell, it's either or a Masterpiece first table model or the Masterpiece 5F4 with the dial knobs. Some of these had windows, but these are the dial knobs. Now, without the C supply, this is battery operated, which requires A and B batteries, and some of the other models required the A, B, and C batteries, but this does not have the C. So if you look online, physically looking at it and the schematic, it could be either or of those two models. So if you would help me figure it out. This is a TRF, a tuned radio frequency radio, and it's in the, you can tell it's really early because it requires you to tune three different three different networks, three different tank circuits. That's what I was looking for. It in this has 5 UV201A triode tubes, and we'll talk a little more about that tube, and I'll show you the tubes a little later. And of course, we've already talked about the 3 tuning condensers, and you can either use the headphone jack or the loudspeaker. Okay, we talked about those batteries. The A battery requires 5 volts for the filaments, and these are direct heated filament cathodes. Filament is the cathode, and we'll go into that a little bit later when we talk more about the tubes. The detector, and here is the control for it, and there's the control for the amplifier. You can't see it. These are grooved, so we'll be able to highlight that with some white paint and bring those letters out a little later. So the detector in here decides, and if they're all the same tubes, there's 5 of them, and so the 5-volt filament for the detector is controlled with a rheostat, and so is the filament to the amplifier tube is controlled with a rheostat. So these are basically, it changes the gain on the tube, so it will it's basically volume controls and or sensitivity. As far as well, let's look inside just a second. Let me drop this. Okay, looking down in the cabinet, you see the 5 tubes. I do have this tube, however, when I got it, apparently someone had, and I'm making this part up, they tried to pull the tube out and broke the tube out of the holder itself. Now these tubes have a bayonet on them. Where's that? Right there. Okay, and these are the short pin tubes, and we will cover this tube in detail a little later. And if you want to send me one of these tubes, you're more than happy to. But this here's the grid leak resistor over here, which is adjustable. and most of the stuff is underneath, which we will explore a little later. Here's the wiring diagram, and here's where all the connections go back here. The B plus for the amplifier tube, the B plus for the detector, the B minus, the A plus, the A minus. Here's the ground, and here's the aerial. I've got to find a knob for this. These screw tabs, I think I've seen these before. I can probably locate those. Some of the flaws I've seen already in this is number one, the front cabinet screws. This is kind of a phenolic plastic type front. It's got the screws missing. That's not a big deal. But also here, the hinges, if you'll look at historical photographs, you will see that there's and you can see the holes here. There was a hinge all the way across this top to the back of this cabinet. Here's the logging chart and what this was, and I've seen these. I'm beginning to think this may be a reproduction. In 100 years, surely somebody wrote on this, but I'm thinking this is a reproduction. You know, when you'd find a station, you'd say Chicago, WGN, the wavelength, all the criteria, and then you'd set what your dial setting number 1 was, number 2, and number 3, and then any remarks like great jazz or whatever. But that hadn't, I think that's probably a reproduction. I'll tell you a little more about this radio a little later, but let's go into the history of the company, which is really had to dig on it, and that's another one of your assignments. Find out as much as you can and put them down in the comments. All right, let's go around the dial a little bit. There's the name and model. Of course, here's the amplifier rheostat. As you can see, it's got an on-off switch. You can turn it off. And then there's the arrow. I think that this is probably can be repositioned to where that arrow will be up and you can see it. Of course, here's where the loudspeaker goes in, and of course the dials. Those are pretty nice. Here is the detector rheostat here. There's no on off on it, and then over here is the headphone. But it's in pretty decent shape. Oh yeah. On off switch, push pull. So what do we know about the Charles Freshman Company Incorporated in New York? Well, it was in business from like 1922 to 1929, and it was basically it had gotten into commercial radio. It was at the heyday of where commercial radio started coming in. But in 1924, it was listed as a radio tube manufacturer. The Freshman, he actually had a building named after him. It was the Freshman Building on 40th Street in New York at the time. The Freshman Masterpiece. Now here is an advertisement from that time frame where that the Freshman Masterpiece sold for $60. Now that sounds like a pretty good chunk of money, which in today's dollars it really was, but you got to remember that was the booming or the roaring 20s, and times were really, really good, and people were having fun, things were changing, people were getting excited after World War I, and everybody wanted radios. Now that $60 may sounded but that's 40% less than the competitors. So he was underselling a bunch of them. And you could actually, and you can see on the advertisement there that the kits went for $17.50. Now I don't know what the kit entailed. I don't know if you got or you had to build the cabinet yourself or anything. There's not a whole lot of detail or anything like that. But also, we know a little bit, and the best we can tell, the business dealings were a little bit shady, to say the least, and some of the materials, such as the rheostats and the transformers in the radio, were kind of defective, and they were of poor quality. So the public never really found out about that because the dealers honored the warranties and fixed the radios and everything. So that's something we may run into with the rheostats and the transformers when we get to trying to make this thing work. We're going to have to come up with a power supply that'll run 5 volts. The tube, and we'll get, like I said, a little later, we'll talk more about this tube. But a quarter of an amp on the filaments. Each tube, there's 5 of them, so that's 1/4 amp on that. And then we'll have to have the B plus that will give us 45 volts for the detector and 90 volts for the amplifier tube. I've talked to Bob. Everybody knows Bob, and he's looking to see if the power supply that I built from their company can be modified to handle this. So, and if not, I'm sure Bob will give me some suggestions where to go and what to do. He's always good to help me when I'm in need, and so I'm sure he will have some good advice on that. There's a lot of ideas on power supplies out there, and we can go with various things. The worst case, we put a 6-volt battery on the A, and then hook this other supply up that's running 90 and 45 volts on here. So we can get power for it. It's just where we want to go. So anyway, in 1926, the Freshman name it was so popular that he wanted promotion. He was a big promoter too. So there was a radio station. Well, there were several. WHN, which is it was in New York. It was founded in 1922, and it's the Ridgewood Times newspaper radio station, and the WQAO Calvary Baptist Church. Now, back then, there wasn't the FCC, it was the Federal Radio Commission, and they required frequency sharing. So WHN, WQAO had to share with WPAP, which was the Palisades Amusement Park. So there was 3 radio stations sharing the frequencies. So Charles Freshman, he funded the building of the studio that WPAP was in. Now here's a picture of that building, and it resembles, or it was built to look like, a Freshman Masterpiece, another model other than this one. So that would, as his promotion. So, but that building only lasted till like 1928, and I'm not sure what the history, what happened to the building or anything like that. But so in December of 1927, the company was bought by Walter Chrysler. Sounds familiar, right? Anyway, Clarence A. Earl was installed as the president, and the name of the company was changed to Earl Radio Corporation. And you can go on and you can find Earl radios out there. I've never seen one, but you can look up the schematics and everything like that. Then, like in 1929, early 1929, the business was booming and their sales were exceptional. However, at the end of 1929, I think everybody out there knows what happened. The big crash, and the company went bankrupt. So the company went under. So that's pretty much the history of that I could find. If anybody else has anything, put it in the comments, and I'll pin it, because like I've told other people in my comments, and I've told it on my videos sometimes, read the comments of every video you're watching, because you can learn, and they're entertaining sometimes, and you can learn from them, because everybody has a lot of information to share, and that's what we appreciate about it. Let's look at the schematic. Here's a schematic that we've found that I think we're going to use. And it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple, and this is one we'll use and we'll talk about as time goes on. So, what are we going to do with this? I guess the first thing we probably will need to do is probably pull those tubes. And I don't know if I've got anything that can test those. We're talking a tube 100 years old. Also, let me show you the other tube in the state of sad affair that it is. There is the tube, and you can see it had come loose. I believe I can glue that back in. If the tube's good, I think it's good. What I can do is I check the filament on the other tubes, and they're running about 3 ohms or so, and there's 5, and I don't have probably a good connection. There's 5. That's not a good connection there. About 5 ohms or so. So I can determine the filament wires. Look how it's probably, see how it's glued. But I believe I can put this back in there and glue that, and maybe salvage this tube. And like I said, if you guys want to send me one of these, I'll be more than happy to take it. So let me tell a little bit more of the story. I bought this several years ago on an online auction, and it was in pretty good shape, and I really got it at a really decent price, and I just wanted one like this. So anyway, it came, and then I found that tube, and I was kind of disappointed in that, and I said, well, you know, it's a tube. And so in it I found an envelope, and it said Freshman radio repair, and I think that's somebody's initials, I think. And the repair, I don't know. Anyway, in that was an advertisement for a power supply from it wasn't just the power supply, it was several things. It was a page out of the Antique Electronics Supply. There was an article of Yesterday's Radios by Mac Yesterday's Treasures. Okay, little article about radios. Don't see a date, but it's back when we had newsletters. Also in that envelope was a business card of Yesterday's Treasures, Mac's Old Time Radio and Radio Museum. Buy, sell, repair. And you ask for Terry or Mac in Lawndale, California. Okay? In it, attached to that, is a little write-up. Welcome to Mac's Old Time Radio Museum, the address, and it tells all about the museum, when it was open, what's in it. I think he ended up with 160 radios in his collection. So that was kind of like, now I don't know, did somebody buy this from Mac? I tend to think it came from Mac himself or the museum, because in the envelope was Ask Terry Blake. Now I don't think that's Mac's wife, Terry, but on the front there's an article in Lawndale, retiree has old radio museum. And there's Mac. His name is Charles Macquarie, and they call him Mac. And it goes on and it talks about his radio museum. It's a human interest story from the California Senior Citizen paper, and the date on it was August of 1990. So this is Mac, and so I tend to think that this came from his collection, or someone got it from his collection and then it got auctioned off. So I'm showing you that so that you may want to read the article. You can pause it and read the article, I'm sure. And I just thought it was pretty cool that that came in it, and it just added a little bit to it, whatever. Now I don't know if the radio works. I think we're going to find out. I don't know if we can make it work. We're going to find out. The main thing is we're going to see inside it. We're going to see a bit of history. We know a little bit about history now, and I feel a little better about all of it because I learned something. And you know what? Somebody remembered Mac today, right? And but that was probably, this was probably in Mac's collection at one point in time, and how it got to me, I bought it online. Now, did somebody else get it from Mac, or did they dissolve Mac's stuff and put it online? I don't know, but that's another one of the mysteries. But I'm going to so in the next part, y'all give me ideas. You tell me what you want to see. You know we're going to take this thing apart in the next series, and I'm going to get these tubes out and get them checked if at all possible. I'm in my mind, my little feeble mind, I have this idea that my Hickok 752A tube checker will check this. Now I may be totally wrong, but we will see. We will see. But I'm gonna next we're gonna pull the tubes, and if I can check them. Not, I'm gonna put them in a safe place, and I'll be watching the mail for your tubes to come rolling in, and we'll come back. We'll talk about the tubes. And matter of fact, 1924, here's a little spoiler alert. 1924, that tube was the #1 seller in the United States. That one tube was the #1 seller. So there ought to be dozens of them out there, right? But anyway, we'll pull this out, we'll look at it, we'll see what's been done to it, what hadn't been done to it, what needs to be done to it. Spoiler alert, I just in between takes, I just throwed the ohm meter across the aerial and the ground and got continuity. So we know that part of it is good. So, but we'll come back on the next go around. We'll look forward to your comments and suggestions and information that y'all are going to be just pouring in and helping me out with this, and tell me where to go, tell me what to do. So anyway, we're going to end this one, and I appreciate all my subscribers and all the comments we've had. I've still got to do those cabinets, and we're getting some good weather here in Tennessee. We may start looking at working on those cabinets in the next week or so. So from Larry from the hills of Tennessee, thanks for watching.